It's a World News Program. I'm your host, Miriam Zian, and these are the headlines. Following the return of tension to the Strait of Hormuz, Washington and Tehran exchange accusations regarding the violation of the truce. America calls Tehran to submit its response to the proposal to end the war today, and Iran says that it is studying the proposal and doesn't care about deadlines and warnings. In Lebanon, martyrs included a paramedic fell in new Zionist massacres in southern towns. Hezbollah confirmed targeting vehicles and gatherings of occupation soldiers. President Aoun renewed his call to pressure the Zionist entity to stop its aggression. Algeria commemorates the National Day of Remembrance, which commemorates the massacres of May 8, 1945. President Tebboune directs the implementation of two projects related to national memory and stresses that commemorating the anniversary reveals the brutality of French colonialism. Hello and welcome back to the details of your program. First, the spokesperson for the Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters, Ibrahim Zolfagari, said Iranian forces targeted U.S. military vessels in the Strait of Hormuz after Washington violated the ceasefire. Iran's news agency quoted a statement by Zolfagari as saying that the U.S. military breached the ceasefire by targeting an Iranian oil tanker moving from Iran's coastal waters near Jask towards the Strait of Hormuz, as well as another ship preparing to enter the strait off the UAE port of Fujairah. He warned that Iran would respond forcefully to any form of aggression, according to the same statement.
The U.S. military violated the ceasefire agreement by targeting an Iranian oil tanker sailing from the coastal waters of the Jask region toward the Strait of Hormuz, in addition to another vessel that was preparing to enter the strait of the Emirati port of Fujairah. Simultaneously, U.S. forces launched airstrikes on civilian areas along the coasts of Bandar Khamir and Sirik, as well as Kashm Island. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran responded immediately with a reciprocal operation, targeting U.S. military naval vessels east of the Strait of Hormuz and south of the port of Chabahar, inflicting heavy losses on them.
The ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is already under pressure, with both sides exchanging accusations over violations and continued military activity reported near the Strait of Hormuz, raising doubts over how stable the agreement really is. Nabil Khazini has more details in this report.
The ceasefire was supposed to quiet the Gulf. Instead, it has opened a new phase of confrontations, one fought as much through accusations and competing narratives as through missiles and naval deployments. Overnight, the fragile truce between Washington and Tehran came under immediate pressure. Iran accused the United States of violating the agreement through a series of strikes near the Strait of Hormuz, while Washington responded with claims that Iranian forces themselves had breached the ceasefire first. And just like that, the optimism that briefly surrounded the agreement began to fade. According to Iranian officials, overnight American operations targeted maritime assets linked to the Revolutionary Guard, injuring 10 sailors and leaving 5 others missing. Tehran described the attacks as a deliberate escalation, warning that continued pressure in the Gulf could push the region back toward open confrontation.
The action carried out last night was both a blatant violation of international law and the United Nations Charter, as well as a violation of the ceasefire, as it was not the first time either. Of course, as you are aware, the country's defenders responded with full force, struck them hard and repelled their aggression. Therefore, while we are nominally in a state of ceasefire, our armed forces remain fully prepared and are monitoring the situation closely, wherever necessary, with full force.
But the American version tells a different story. U.S. officials say naval forces intercepted and targeted 2 Iranian oil tankers that were allegedly attempting to break through what Washington describes as a security blockade around key shipping routes. The operation, American officials insist, was necessary to preserve stability in one of the world's most sensitive maritime corridors. Two capitals, two narratives, one increasingly fragile ceasefire. Yet despite the military activity, Donald Trump is still projecting confidence that diplomacy has not collapsed.
We're negotiating with the Iranians. We have, you probably heard, we took our 3 destroyers and we rammed them through some pretty big stuff today, and we knocked the hell out of them. When the destroyers weren't hurt in any way, the people weren't hurt, but they were firing at us, and we were firing back at them.
That contrast now defines the crisis. Officially, negotiations continue. Unofficially, the Gulf is still simmering. The language of de-escalation remains. The logic of confrontation has not disappeared. And nowhere is that tension more visible than in the Strait of Hormuz itself, the narrow waterway through which a significant share of the world's energy supplies passes every day.
The United States has blocked more than 70 oil tankers from entering or leaving Iranian ports. In a post on X, U.S. Central Command said the vessels can carry more than 166 million barrels of Iranian oil, worth over $13 billion. The U.S. military announced on Friday that its forces opened fire on 2 Iranian-flagged tankers as they attempted to reach an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman. U.S. Central Command said one of its aircraft disabled the 2 tankers with precision strikes, preventing them from reaching Iran. And an Iranian military source told Tasnim news agency that the United States would face a tough response if it attempts to harass Iranian ships or enter the Gulf again. The source added that clashes have currently stopped and calm has returned after an exchange of fire, but warned that similar confrontations could still erupt in the region. Iran announced on Friday that it had seized the U.S.-sanctioned oil tanker carrying Iranian oil. According to a statement broadcast on state TV, the Iranian Navy detained the tanker Ocean Koi in a planned operation in the Gulf of Oman and escorted it to Iran's southern coast after it allegedly attempted to disrupt Iranian oil exports. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Friday that Washington is awaiting Iran's response to a proposal aimed at ending the war. Speaking in Rome, Rubio said the U.S. would review the contents of the response and hopes it will be a step toward serious negotiations.
We're expecting a response from them today at some point. We have not received that yet, as you know, in the last hour, but perhaps that will come. Their system is still highly fractured and a bit dysfunctional as well, so that may be serving as an impediment. I hope it's a serious offer. I really do.
Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai said Tehran is still examining the U.S. proposal and will announce its decision once it is reached, regardless of American deadlines. Speaking to reporters on Friday, Baghai also condemned Thursday's U.S. strike on 2 Iranian oil tankers off Jask, calling it a clear violation of international law and the ceasefire agreement, which he said remains in effect. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran will not yield to U.S. pressure under any circumstances. In a post on X Friday, Araghchi said that whenever a diplomatic solution is available, the United States instead chooses reckless military action. He questioned whether this is a pressure tactic or linked to deception by President Donald Trump, adding that Iran will not accept pressure or back down. The United States urged members of the UN Security Council on Thursday to support its draft resolution calling on Iran to stop attacks and halt the laying of mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Council members have begun discussions on the US-sponsored text, which demands that Iran end such activities. Tehran has called on the international community not to pass the resolution, while diplomats say China and Russia are likely to veto it. China said a tanker carrying petroleum products with a Chinese crew was attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said during a press briefing that Chinese nationals were on board and no injuries have been reported so far. He also expressed deep concern over ships being affected by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East.
判尤为重要。根据目前掌握的情况。
According to information currently available, the vessel attacked is Marshall Islands flagged and has Chinese crew on board. As of now, no casualties have been reported. China is deeply concerned that the ongoing conflict has affected a large number of vessels and seafarers and left them stranded in the strait, stressing that restoring unimpeded passage as soon as possible and ensuring the safety of civilian ships and crew are in the common interests of regional countries and the wider international community.
And 12 people were killed and others injured in Israeli airstrikes on various areas in southern Lebanon. According to the National Lebanese National News Agency, 5 people were killed and 3 injured in an Israeli strike on the town of Tura in Tyre. It added that an air raid on Zararia resulted in 2 deaths, while another strike on Duair, west of Nabatiyah, killed 4 people. The agency also reported that a drone strike targeting a motorcycle in Jebshit in the Nabatiyah district killed 1 young man. Hezbollah said it targeted an Israeli D9 bulldozer with a drone in the town of Al-Bayada in southern Lebanon, claiming a direct hit. In the statement, the group also said it shelled a gathering of Israeli vehicles and soldiers in the city of Khiyam with artillery and struck a Merkava tank and another vehicle on the outskirts of Dir Siryan using a guided missile, also claiming casualties. Lebanese President Joseph Aoun urged the European Union to pressure Israel to enforce a ceasefire and stop demolishing homes in occupied southern Lebanese villages. During a meeting on Friday with EU Commissioner for Crisis Management Haj al-Habib, he reaffirmed Lebanon's commitment to a full ceasefire and the launch of negotiations to stabilize the south, enable the deployment of the Lebanese army up to the international borders, secure the release of Lebanese prisoners, and allow displaced residents to return home. Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune returned to Algeria on Friday afternoon from Ankara after an official visit to Turkey. He was received at Algiers International Airport by Prime Minister Sifi Ghraib, Army Chief of Staff General Said Shengriha, and State Minister Ibrahim Merad. A formation of Algerian Air Force aircraft escorted the presidential plane as it entered national airspace. Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune concluded his official visit to Turkey on Friday, aimed at strengthening bilateral ties and cooperation. President Tebboune left Ankara after a visit that highlighted the long-standing relations between the two countries and their shared commitment to expanding cooperation further.
Ankara Merkez Komutanı. Onur kıtası görüşünüze hazırdır Ekselans. Sağ ol. Merhaba, asker.
Members of the Algerian community in Turkey gathered on Friday morning at the residence of President Abdelmajid Tebboune in Ankara to greet him during his official visit. They arrived from across Turkey, waving Algerian flags and holding banners praising Algeria's achievements under his leadership. President Tebboune greeted and shook hands with several members of the community who expressed support for his policies and appreciation for his attention to Algerians abroad, also welcoming the outcomes of his visit to Turkey. The first Algeria-Turkey high-level strategic cooperation council session, co-chaired by Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, strengthened bilateral ties and resulted in the signing of several agreements and memoranda across key sectors. Marwa Blair has more.
Algeria and Turkey are moving toward a deeper strategic alignment, driven by growing political convergence and expanding economic cooperation. The first session of the High-Level Strategic Cooperation Council reflected what both President Abdelmajid Tebboune and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan described as a shared commitment to advancing bilateral relations. The summit laid the groundwork for a broader partnership linking both sides of the Mediterranean through agreements spanning energy, mining, steel, agriculture, industry, and technology. Both countries also reaffirmed ambitions to raise trade and investment volumes to $10 billion by 2030. Beyond economics, the summit highlighted strong political coordination on major regional and international issues, particularly amid escalating tensions in the Middle East. Presidents Tebboune and Erdogan stressed the responsibility of the international community toward the Palestinian and Lebanese peoples in the face of the continued Zionist attacks, while reiterating support for the Palestinian people's right to an independent state. Algeria and Turkey also voiced shared concern over violations targeting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Federal Republic of Somalia, warning of broader risks to stability across the Horn of Africa. The Algerian-Turkish summit also reflected growing mutual recognition between both leaderships. President Erdogan awarded President Tebboune the State Order of Turkey, while President Tebboune honored his Turkish counterpart with Algeria's National Order of Merit at the rank of Athir. That recognition follows earlier distinctions, including Istanbul University's decision in 2022 to award President Tebboune an honorary doctorate in recognition of his role in strengthening international cooperation and historic Algeria-Turkey relations. Deep-rooted ties between the two countries are also reflected through the active Algerian community in Turkey, contributing across sectors ranging from education and trade to industry and investment, a partnership that is steadily evolving from economic cooperation to a broader strategic alliance with growing regional reach.
Algeria celebrated on Friday the National Day of Memory, commemorating the 81st anniversary of the May 8, 1945 massacres, which it describes as a crime exposing the brutality of French colonial rule. In the town of Kharata, about 60 kilometers east of Béjaïa, local authorities and civil groups held commemorative events recalling the killing of thousands of unarmed protesters, including women, children, and elderly people during the demonstrations of that day. And Algerian President Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune announced instructions to launch 2 national legislative projects linked to memory and history. In a message marking the 81st anniversary of the May 8, 1945 massacres, he said, "The first project concerns national sessions on memory and history, while the second involves preparing a draft law on national memory." He also reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to preserving the legacy of the victims and continuing national remembrance efforts.
I announced the directive to the Ministry of Mujahideen and Veterans Affairs to begin implementing 2 projects. The first concerns national sessions on memory and history, and the second involves preparing a draft law on national memory in tribute to the martyrs of the May 8, 1945 massacres and to all the martyrs of Algeria, whose pure souls we solemnly remember on this National Day of Remembrance, commemorating the 81st anniversary of those massacres.
President Abdelmajid Tebboune said that commemorating May 8 reveals the deep-rooted hatred of colonialism and exposes what he described as the moral collapse of an occupying force stripped of civilized values.
On May 8th, the Algerian people commemorate one of the most horrific massacres and crimes against humanity in modern times. They recall that image steeped in colonial hatred, one of the most appalling atrocities suffered by humankind, embodying a blatant disregard for the right to life. It was an image that reflected a moral collapse devoid of the values of civilization, values that extremist circles still boast about and openly proclaim to this day without any shame in their falsehood of colonialism as a bearer of civilization and progress.
On May 8, 1945, thousands of Algerians took to the streets to celebrate the end of World War II and claim their independence promised by colonial France, but instead they were faced with bullets and military crackdown that decimated over 45,000 innocent Algerians. Osama Ayadi has the story.
While crowds filled the streets of France celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany and the end of the Second World War in Europe, another chapter of history was unfolding across the Mediterranean in Algeria, one written not in celebration, but in blood. In the mountainous regions of Stif, Galma and Kharata, thousands of Algerians took to the streets, carrying banners demanding freedom, dignity, and the promises of equality they believed had been earned through sacrifice during the war. Instead, the demonstrations were met with brutal repression. What began as nationalist marches quickly escalated into one of the darkest episodes of French colonial history. Following clashes between protesters and colonial authorities, French military forces, settler militias, and police launched a violent crackdown across northeastern Algeria. Villages were bombarded, civilians were arrested, and entire communities were subjected to collective punishment. The exact death toll estimate is as many as 45,000 people. Yet beyond the numbers lies an undeniable reality. The massacres became a defining wound in Algeria's collective memory and a turning point in the struggle against colonial rule. For many historians, the events of May 8, 1945 marked the moment when hopes for peaceful reform gave way to the conviction that independence would only come through resistance. Nearly a decade later, Algeria's war for independence would erupt, ultimately leading to freedom in 1962. Today, the mountains of Stif, Galma and Kharata still stand as silent witnesses to that tragedy. Their valleys carry the memory of a people who endured violence, yet refused to surrender their identity, dignity, or aspiration for freedom. Every year, commemorations across Algeria honor their victims, not only as casualties of colonial repression, but as symbols of resilience and steadfastness. In a cruel twist of history, the same day that marked liberation for Europe became for Algerians a reminder that freedom remained a painful but worthy chapter. As the world reflects on the victories of 1945, Algeria continues to remember another truth of that day, that even amid celebrations of peace, some nations were still fighting to be heard.
That is the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching.